And constructor calls in inheritance, very important and interesting thing. Say you have a superclass and then you have a subclass. I have a constructor in my superclass, I have a constructor in my subclass. So now what happens? You create an object of type subclass, so it's going to be subclass S1 is equal to new subclass. So in this case, what will happen? You have allocation for what are the variables here? In superclass you have A, in subclass you have C. So how will the constructors be executed? Say the constructor for the superclass will execute first, initialize A to 10. So that is the order. First it will execute this, next it will execute this and initialize C to 20. So when you have an hierarchy of inheritance, what happens is the superclass constructor gets executed first, next the subclass, and then the other classes in the hierarchy. So we will see this with some coding examples. Order of constructor calls in inheritance. So let's go and code this one. You can go and create any two superclass. Say I want to have a class. Can you see this? Is it visible to all of you? People sitting at the end. You want me to increase the font size? So class, say I just have all the classes in the same file because shifting between files might be confusing for you. So we'll have a class by name superclass itself. And then what we are going to have inside this is we can have this variable, protected variable int a. And then we can have this constructor for a superclass. It's a default constructor. And what we are going to do here is we'll have this message given to the user, that is superclass constructor is called. And then we just have this. Next what we'll do is we'll go and create a subclass that will extend the superclass. So you go and class subclass, it extends superclass. So that's how inheritance comes into picture. And we can have any variable here, say private int c, something like that. We can have a constructor here. So in this constructor what we are going to have is we are going to just we can just have a message out, subclass constructor call. Okay, so we have a superclass and a subclass extending the superclass to constructors, default constructors. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an object of type subclass. So subclass S1 is equal to new subclass, and then when I execute this, what will be the output? First the superclass constructor will be called, you'll get this message out, then the subclass constructor will be called. So it's the order of execution, just to know the order of execution. You see here, first superclass constructor is called automatically, and then subclass constructor is called. Though you create an object of subclass, the superclass constructor also executes so that it initializes the variables of your superclass. But an object of type superclass is not created. Is that clear? So that's the order of constructor calls. If you have another class extending my subclass, then again it will start from superclass, subclass, and then this class. That's how it executes. Okay. So we'll see the next thing, that is parameterized constructors and how parameterized constructors execute in a hierarchy like this. So let's start with our say subclass as a parameterized constructor and it initializes C. So I will use a parameterized constructor here. So you will have int input and then you can have some initialization here. Let me delete this one. So let me have C initialized to the input given by the user. So I have a parameterized constructor for my subclass alone. So how will you create an object for a subclass now? You just pass some value. And then we'll also print the value in A and B. Say we'll initialize A to some value here, by default value in the superclass. So you have a variable A in the superclass, I'm initializing it to 10 by default. Whereas in the subclass, I'm getting the input from the user and then initializing that to the value for the member. So now what will be the output if I call this, if I just print both C and A, what will be the output? Because we are passing for C, I think we are passing 30, right? So that is for a subclass variable. For the superclass, by automatically, you initialize that to 10 inside the constructor. Now the question is, if I have a parameterized constructor in my superclass too. For instance, I have int some input here, and then I want to initialize my superclass variable to that value coming in as input. So it's parameterized constructor in the superclass and parameterized constructor in the subclass. Now how will you go and initialize the superclass object? I mean superclass variable. In C++, variable to do this, how will you do that in C++? You just put a colon and then you pass the values to your superclass, right? Here, let us not waste time. Let me tell you how you do that. So, for when you're creating an object of type subclass, you're going to receive two inputs. One input for your superclass, one input for your subclass. So, you'll have int input 1, comma, int input. So, now this input 1 should be passed to your superclass. How will you pass that? Use the super keyword, and then what you're going to do is, it's a method call, so you're going to pass input 1 to your superclass. So once when you create an object, you're going to pass two values, one for this and one for this. So this input 1 will be given to super, right? So what happens is, when you use the super keyword, it will directly go and invoke your superclass constructor and pass that value here. So your A will be getting whatever that is coming in as input 1, whereas input 2 will be going into your subclass. So you'll use this super method. You have to explicitly call that to invoke your superclass constructor when it is a parameterized constructor. So let's go and run this one. So what will happen now is, say I'm now giving 10 for my superclass and 30 for my subclass. This will go to my superclass using the super method. 30 will be for my subclass. So let's go and execute this. Can we move forward? We look at method overloading versus method overriding here. Very important concept in inheritance. And after learning that, we'll see the use of method, use of super keyword again. We have some more uses of super keyword. We'll see that. Before that, we'll see what is method overloading versus method overriding. Do you know the difference between overloading and overriding? What is overloading? Say I have one class here, just a class, and then say I have some methods. You take some very simple methods, add, and then input 1 comma input 2, and then we can print the addition of input 1 plus input 2. Okay, so in the same class I can have again a same method with the same signature. What do you mean? I mean with a different signature. What do you mean by a signature? The number of arguments you're going to take. Say here input 1 comma int input 2 comma int input 3. So what you are going to do here is, we are going to just print input 1 plus input 2 plus input 3. Okay, so here we have just one class, and we have two methods with the same name but different signature. How will you go and say, if I go and create an object of type superclass, how can I create an object of type superclass? So you can say superclass s1, s is equal to new superclass. If I do s dot add, and then I pass only two arguments here, and then s dot add again, and then I pass three arguments, 2 comma 3 comma 4. So now, using the number of arguments, the corresponding function calls happen, right? If I pass only two arguments, this function call will happen. If I pass three arguments, this function call is going to happen. So let's go and run this one and check what will be the output here. Okay, we have some issues. We have to delete this subclass. 3 and 9. The question here is, when this decision happens, which function should be called When the decision happens, during compile time or runtime? See, method overloading, when you talk about method overloading, it comes under static binding. The decision happens during compilation. So when the compiler compiles it, you're going to have this decision on which function should be called. So it's called static binding. So during compilation itself, it decides that this will be mapped to this function and this will be mapped to this function. So which function should be called is decided during compilation. So that is called static binding, and method overloading happens to use static binding. So overloading, you talk about overloading for all the methods inside one single class. Is this clear? So what is overriding? So I'll give an example for overriding. Overriding is for methods in two different classes. And we'll take an example here. We'll have this class super class here. We'll have this very simple method, you can say display method. And then we can have a message here that is super class function, something like that. And then we can have a subclass too, class subclass, which extends the superclass. And then what we are going to have here is we are just going to have the same function in my subclass too. So what is the same function here? So it's again the same function with the same signature too, whereas it's from my subclass. So now when I go and create an object of type subclass, how can I create an object of type subclass? Let me delete all these things. So you can have, if I just call s1.display, which function will be called? You're very much confused about this one. Let me even delete this one. Now say there's nothing in my subclass. If I go and just perform s1.display, which one will be called? Yes, superclass function should be called. Why superclass function is called? Because that is public, right? In inheritance, whatever that is here will be inherited. Got it? But if you have a very similar function in your subclass too, now which one will be called? Subclass function is getting called. So if you have the same function with the same signature in your subclass, that will override the definition of the function in your superclass. That is called method overriding, and it happens during runtime. It is called late binding. Can we override variables? Can we override variables in the superclass in your subclass? Who can answer me this? If you have the same method in the subclass overrides that. Do you agree? If I have the same variable in my subclass, can I override that? So let me go and give an example. Say I have this variable in my superclass protected int a, and then let me have a constructor. Okay, sorry. It should be here inside my class. So let me have this variable protected int a, and then we'll have a constructor that will initialize our variable a to 10. By default, it initializes it to 10. Now we'll have the same variable in my subclass too. So it is protected int, what is that? A. Same name, same data type, everything, same specifier. And then we'll have a constructor here for my subclass. So what we are going to do in the constructor for the subclass is I'm going to initialize a to 20. Now if I go and print in my display function the value of a, will it be 20 or 10? Will this a override whatever that is there in my superclass? Will this first of all compile, or will it give me an error? Because when you say it's inheritance, both the variables are in the same class, right? and both the variable names are the same. So tell me what will happen. Error will happen. That's what I too thought of, but it's not giving me an error. It's giving me subclass function 20. So whatever value are given in the subclass is being taken, but that does that mean it is overriding the value of superclass? See, here comes the super keyword. What we can do is we can have another sysout statement in my subclass display function. So I can just display super.a. So this super is a keyword. Dot a will access the superclass variable a. What is the value given to superclass variable a? 10. So if you just go and run this one out, you see here it's 20 and 10. Superclass variable, the subclass variable is 20, whereas superclass A is holding 10. So though we are having the same variables, the memory allocation is different for what is there in subclass and what is there in superclass. So what is that we conclude from this exercise is you can never override variables in inheritance. You can only override methods. Please have that in mind. And one more thing, you cannot override static methods in inheritance. So if I have a static method, for instance, you know what a static method is, right? It's not tied to any particular object, it's for the class. So if I have a public static void, say when I make display to be a static method, you can see immediately I get an error in my subclass because it says the instant method cannot override the static method from superclass. So you cannot override a static method in your superclass in your subclass. Please uh, maintain that. But you can inherit a static method in your superclass in your subclass. When you create objects of the type subclass, that static method will be common for all the objects of the type subclass. But you cannot override, give a new definition for your static method in the superclass. I know it's a lot of superclass, subclass terminologies, but you got it. You can inherit a static method from your superclass into your subclass. When you create objects of subclass, the static method will be working for your subclass. But you cannot give a new definition for the static method in your subclass. So that's what it says. When you convert something to static, it's giving an issue. But then when I remove this display method in my subclass, there are no issues because this static method is inherited by my subclass. So when I create objects of subclass, the static method is common for all the objects. So I think you have some fair idea about method overriding now in inheritance, right? Overriding happens between different classes and it's during runtime. So there is one more thing. Say I have this display method here too. Say let's go and have the display method. Let's remove the static definition. The only thing I want to ask you is, say I somehow want to invoke the superclass display method. How can I do that? There's a way to do that. From your subclass, you can invoke the superclass display method. You have to give super dot method name. So when I use super dot, it always works with the parent class methods or variables. So now when I invoke this, what will happen? First, superclass function will be called, this display will be called, and then the subclass display method will execute. So let us go and run this one. Let's check whether our superclass method is getting called. So s1.display will invoke our superclass display too. So you see here superclass display function is called, subclass display function is also called. So how can you invoke a superclass method? Well, you can just use super dot method name and invoke it. So these are the uses of super keyword. You can access superclass variables in your uh, superclass. From your subclass, you can access the superclass variables. You can access superclass methods from your subclass. But with super, you cannot access private methods of your superclass. Private is always private. And if you are extending a class and you're not in the same package as your superclass, you cannot access the default variables or default methods too. Okay. So UML notation for inheritance, I think in our lab classes we talked about unified modeling language. What is this UML? It is used for designing an object-oriented system. We will not directly land up into coding. Before starting off any major projects, see, when I'm talking about projects, I'm talking about projects for the banking sector, retail, healthcare, large projects, large business organizations. So in that case, you cannot go ahead and start your code. You have to go and design things. So here, what I'm showing you on the board is an UML notation. UML is by IBM, and they have some tools, and this is an industry standard. They follow it in the organization. So you're going to represent a class, you're going to represent the inheritance. So our class is represented: class name, all the data members, methods. Class name, all the data members, and methods. So so what we are going to do here is, this inheritance will be represented using this kind of an arrow mark. That's a standard. So when you have inheritance hierarchies, first we will go and construct this diagram for our entire system. And then some experienced architects or designers will approve your design, see whether it is going to work or not, and then they'll approve it for coding. So here we'll be mentioning everything from what is protected, what is private, what is default, what is the return type of a methods. Everything will be denoted clearly in our design. So this comes first. We'll not start off with coding in the industry. So you have to write this specification. We'll construct this using rational rows or Argo UML or any tool, Visio or YAD. We have a lot of tools there. We look at the next one, the use of final keyword. What is this final keyword and why we are going to use this? And then we'll wind up. Final keyword will be the final concept for today's class. So let me give this final keyword alone. So what is final? Say when I declare a variable to be final, protected final int a is equal to 10. It becomes a constant. That's it. Once when you declare a variable to be final, you cannot go and do any kind of assignment to that variable later on. But once when you are declaring a variable to be final, you should see to that you initialize that variable. Very important. So here you see I am getting this error when I do a equals and a is assigned the value 10, because it becomes a constant and you cannot assign any further values to your final variable. That can be inherited in your subclass, but it cannot be assigned any new values. So that is the use of final with respect to keyword, with respect to variables. When you talk about methods, say if I give final, public, final, void, if I make a method final, the use of this is you cannot override that in your subclasses. Say you inherit the superclass. When you make a method to be final, you cannot override that. You cannot give a new definition for that in your subclass. Say it gives me an error here when I made it final. Cannot override the final method from superclass. So that is how final works with methods. You can prevent users from overriding the definitions. You can also have a class to be final. Final class, superclass. When I make a class to be final, you cannot inherit that class. You can prevent users from inheriting a class if the class is final. So now you see, immediately it throws me an error when I'm extending my superclass, because it says you cannot create a subclass of that type superclass because superclass is declared final. So these are the uses of the final keyword. Okay, abstract class we'll see in tomorrow's class. Cannot change values of variables, cannot override methods declared as final, cannot inherit classes declared as final. Any doubts here so far?